Welcome back to Good Morning Kenya. This is People and Politics. My name is Mike Migwi, and now I'm joined by Wakili Peter Wasaga, who is an advocate of the High Court. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
And also Wakili George Kithi, also an advocate of the High Court. Welcome.
Asante sana.
All right. So far we have received the Star newspaper, and we are going to look at what is saying on the front page, even as we wait for the rest of the local dailies. Big test for Ruto as new budget starts. President has to balance between fiscal sustainability and possible public outreach. The government has breached borrowing limit and has no wiggle room to take loans. Let me start with you, Wakili Kithi. What are the options so far? Because we have hit the borrowing limit, and the chances of increasing taxes are very small.
Well, budgeting process is basically a legislative process that gives the government, or those in power, the power to, well, of course, make arrangements, basically match what the public needs will be, or the government needs will be, a policy around it, and eventually legislate on the same. And therefore, the principal arms that are involved are the proposal made by the executive through Treasury, and then the process is basically forwarded for purpose of representation to Parliament. And Parliament makes the law, basically, on where to get the money from and to appropriate, use the money and empower the government to use money. The government, even if there's money and there's no power to use it, cannot use the money. Suffice it to say, therefore, that it is through representation that the people of Kenya allow those that are in power to take their money from them through a process of legislation. That's a very robust debate in recent times. And then money will be used for the people and for the benefit of the country, including development. Now, ordinarily, nobody comes to power with his own money to use the money for the people. So those that campaign to get into power, including for presidency, governor, and all that, they basically are asking you, put me into power, then you give me money so that I can work for you. That's really the relationship. But there are safeguards that have been put into place, including that there is not only the two institutions that have been the only ones. We have put something called public participation in the context, so that then the public has a direct say into how their funds are going to be used. So obviously everything that's going to be proposed has to go back to the people for approval or for their input. Now, last year wasn't very good in as far as that process is concerned, because it triggered questions, hue, outcry, and basically it was an emotionalist process where the people continuously, persistently, consistently, and insistently told the government that we do not want to give you this money. We want to give a certain percentage of the money, but not the taxes that you're asking. But of course, in that whole cycle, the organs that have more power in decision making are probably the executive and Parliament. The people will render their pronouncements and their what options they would want, but it is because the Constitution says so. In fact, public participation is probably an irritant to government, because it's a process where you go back and listen to views. You don't have to follow them. There's no mechanism upon which public participation is a legislative process. The legislative process is by Parliament. And because it was irritant, they were ignored. Because they were ignored, they went back to Article 1 and pushed their way to be heard. And that's why the Gen Z protestations came to be. Suffice it to say that the budgeting process as of now becomes a big test, as now is highlighted, in the context of what I have said and what happened last year. In effect, therefore, there'll be a lot of watchful eye from the public. The legislative process and obviously the executive are going to participate anyway. But in terms of the public, it's going to be to provide a very watchful eye and Article 1 of the Constitution and the right of public participation, a right in the Constitution, so that what is being done, it is responsive to the people and the current situation of the economy today. Meaning, therefore, I think the issue will be, are we being overtaxed as a people? Are we giving the government enough? And is there accountability? So I think the processes, the emotional process, as will be carried forward from last year to this year, will be that which we gave you, have used it enough? That which you protested against in terms of the largesse of use of money, wantonly displaying it out there without being accountable, has it been accounted enough so that we give you more of it in terms of increment of taxes? So I think the balance here, the emotional balance, is going to be, do we increase taxes, and to what extent, so that we don't trigger the public participation retaliatory attacks that we had last time through agencies and the public? Or alternatively, do we maintain what we have now that we've busted our ceiling in terms of borrowing? Do we then maintain that process and we degenerate the country into more debt problems? And therefore, I think it's not going to be easy. But again, it will have a better and more closer eye to the public, to the Kenyans, as opposed to the whim of the executive and those that are in power in parliament.
Okay. The biggest predicament for the government right now is increasing taxes could trigger fresh public outreach. But now the status quo leaves the government with a fiscal deficit. What do you think are the options?
Thank you so much. I love how my senior Keithy has put it. One thing is very clear, that one of the main sources of revenue for Kenya is through taxation. Actually, it's the main, then the borrowing comes second, both domestic and international borrowing. But there is one thing that we also need to question: the role of the people in the budget-making process, and whether their views are put into consideration, given that that was the main bone of contention in the Gen Z protests. We elect not as robots, but we elect to be represented. That is why that delegatory role is given to the citizens. The power belongs to the people. So if there is adequate consultation, and the consultation is put into action, or the public are able to examine and give a testament that their participation was actually taken note of, or an explanation was given to convince them into getting into these new loans, for example, going beyond what we borrow right now, or perhaps just bringing in new taxing options and repealing the existing laws. And that is something that will augur well with the citizens. You see, when we go back to June 2024, what really triggered the electorates or the citizens is that they outrightly objected to the many tax regimes that were introduced in the Finance Bill 2024. But they were all ignored. There was a lot of impunity. There was a lot of braggadocio from the side of the government, and you could see the members of parliament were outrightly not listening to the members of the public. They were only listening to the executive. And it's very interesting that sometimes they listen to the executive, yet they know very well deep down in their hearts that whatever they are doing is very wrong. A classic example is after the president stood to the pressure and decided to refer the finance bill back to parliament for reconsideration after the parliament was after the Gen Z actually went to parliament and caused havoc. The same members of parliament whom we elect to represent us were busy clapping and rejoicing at the president's pronunciation, yet they are the ones who passed this bill without considering the views of the public. one thing when we go to Article 10, which is one of my favorite articles because it enshrines the national, the principles and the values of governance in this country. One of it is accountability. We need to account for the last finance year, Finance Act 2023, the new tax regimes that were introduced. Were they able to bridge the gap? Are we able to see a shift from the economic angle and all the other angles to warrant the introduction of new taxes? Because when you come to request the public to pay more, they should see value for what they gave in the past finance year. But what happens is that we have budgeted corruption. Things are inflated just for purposes of benefiting few pockets to the expense of the public, so that we give much money but we still have the same problems. There is increased unemployment. People barely survive in this country. I know you know Migwi. Yet you bring proposals to increase the taxes that are not beneficial to the public. If you could table a report of how the economy has improved, and it could even be scientifically proven through opinion polls, through the living standards of the electorate, then introducing taxes is not a problem, because of course you can account for it. But if few leaders are able to come out, brag with expensive lifestyles at the expense of the public, the citizens who are giving the taxes, then it's obvious that we are not taxing the government. We are not funding the government. We are funding individuals. Then we looking at the principles of taxation. Number one, there is also the certainty. You do not just come out from nowhere with exorbitant taxes without certainty, because one, that has a way of imbalancing the citizens and also interfering with businesses, because when there is increased taxation, there is increased production, especially on those areas of production. So those are things that we have to look at this time. But the bottom line, Migwi, is that we have no option. We have no option. We will just have to go dig deeper into our pockets. The only thing that the only tool that we'll now have is to enhance the accountability. Let's speak it out. Let's go to court if there is embezzlements. Let those who are found culpable of embezzling public funds be arrested and held to account, not being shielded by the government that is seeking to eradicate corruption. So we should speak from our mouths, our actions, and our deeds. That will in itself bring confidence to the public.
Wakili here raises a very important aspect of accountability and also seeing value for taxes. Even though, let's say hypothetically, taxes are introduced, they are not as punitive. Is it a matter of paying taxes, or Kenyans are not seeing value for the high taxes that they pay?
Well, we fund government. In fact, if you extend that narrative, we are not in this country for free. We're in this country because we maintain the country through contribution into a central kitty, consolidated fund for the country to run. So nobody's in this country for free. We pay to be in this country. But we pay because we say so, through the process and safeguards that we put into place. Now, democracy has its follies. One of it that we send men and women into a house, some sort of a national delegation conference where they sit and speak for us and decide for us how much we're going to pay to stay in this country, or how much we are paying to be in this country. But when those human persons, human beings get there, they make decisions based on many whims that affect them. The last one is the person who sent them there. Yes. That's the last. Otherwise, the executive and many other reasons inform the decisions that they make, including how much money they're going to make in the process. Now, the budgeting process is a bit emotive and is laced with many interests. One of it is ethnicity. You see, times over, legislative process has an ethnic bias into it, to those that are making decisions, the roads that are going to be built, the hospitals that are going to be built, using centralized income of government from its people, but it has to be divided apparently equitably, but of course factually, with biases less in it. The second issue, again, that affects that whole process is the incompetence of the same people that we send to represent us, that is Parliament. Parliament today is the weakest link we have in history of this country. There has never been Gen Z's protests in this country until last year because of the decisions of this Parliament. As my good friend has said, it is because they knew they are doing something wrong and do it anyway. Because they have to do it to please a whim that is not a justiciable whim. Meaning, therefore, committing a wrong for the pleasure of that which then is incorporated in the existential circumstances as will be prevailing at the time. And therefore, if Parliament does not represent the voice of the people, and as against and at the pleasure of a service of a certain, whether foreigners or even certain powers in Kenya, then it means there'll be friction in public. Now, we can excuse, and we ought to excuse the executive for whatever proposal they're making, because they have to preserve themselves. The executive, while in executive seat, as at the time, including the presidency, cabinet, and all, want money and the comfort of having money to discharge whatever they want, including the largesse of doing it. So you give them more money, they will use it. I mean, definitely they're going to spend it. But as they extend the proposal to the highest extent possible for them to be accommodated to take money from us, from the public, there is a checker to it, and that is Parliament. It ought to come in between and contain that use. That's why Parliament has all the three main responsibilities in the Constitution. Legislation is one of them, and I have said budgetary process is a legislative process. The second one is representation. They'll be there to represent the voices, because it's a delegate conference of sorts. They have been sent to delegate for the people of Kenya. And the third one is oversight. Very important. It's oversight on the executive. What we have seen is that Parliament has many times over and over and over, failed, so that then, because they have failed, people jump over Parliament and go to court to stop the taxation processes and stop many things that Parliament ought to have stopped in the first instance as a stopgap and as the oversight authority under the Constitution given by the people of Kenya. And therefore, Parliament has failed. Continuously, it persistently fails the people of Kenya. If people go to court to get a result that, for purpose of justice for the people of Kenya, it means somebody hasn't done his job. Why then should we end up in court when in fact we're questioning a legislative process in the first place? So the circumstances, therefore, will be justice must be seen and felt by the people. Justice is in the context of law ordinarily. Context of law in that what the law says is justice. But if what the law says is oppressive, it ceases to be justice. So it is not justice by law. It is justice by the power of the people, by what people feel will be just. So it need only be done through the process of law. It must be seen to be done, in fact. Therefore, we say de jure, by law, there could be what is perceived as justice or put into place in paper as just. But then there is the actual justice, which is by the people of Kenya. And therefore, if you legislate to say VAT goes to 25%, by law, to charge 25% is just. But by the people of Kenya, in fact, it is injustice, because you are oppressing them. So law can be oppressive. If Parliament makes bad law, it leads to injustice. So the perception that law is just then stops to make sense. That's why last year, although the legislative process ought to have been just, lead to, I mean, we all subscribe to the law. It was bad law. And therefore people went to protest because in fact, they knew what justice is. And therefore justice is what the people say. What is agreed in the national psyche as just, not what is being legislated. Now, ultimately, let me probably sum it up this way. Ultimately, therefore, Parliament must not speak for itself. It must speak for what is just according to the people.
What is just according to the people. Wakili, now henceforth, and pegging on what he has said, has Parliament learned its lesson in matters budget process, and are we going to see robust involvement of the public in the same process?
No, Parliament, that's a very difficult question. Has Parliament learned its lesson? No. Because, like Wakili has said, there are so many factors. And most importantly, or most the major factor is the leaning and the attempt to be politically correct. You see, politics in Kenya is ethnicized. And sometimes we support laws not because they are just. We support laws because they are proposed by our person. And so we are trying to cover his nakedness. And that is why something would be outrageously wrong and everyone can see it as wrong. But parliamentarians will support it with their breath, with their life, and with their blood, because they want to be politically relevant. It's because politics revolve around individuals. So that when you are seen not to be singing the tune of the political god, in quotes, then you risk being decampaigned by the same person, you risk being de-whipped from parliamentary committees, and you risk being left in the political cold. So that is why they support it with their mouths, but deep down their hearts, they do not support it.
But then again, who do they represent?
Exactly.
Is it the powers that be or the people?
That's why I said politics in Kenya revolves around individuals. You see, when you have, or when you belong to a major party, it's very easier for you to sail through. Take, for example, in Nyanza, when you're in ODM, you will win a political seat without any struggle, provided you get the nomination. And sometimes these nominations are not done meritoriously. The nominations are given. You are given. I feel like I should work with Kithi. He understands my ideology. And then they will say, well, once Baba has spoken, who am I to go against Baba? It goes to Rift Valley when Ruto speaks, the president, then who am I to go against the president? So when they go to parliament, they know very well that they do not have the mandate of the people. The people were coerced into voting them in with a narrative that these are the people who will help me up there. Because the politicians always have a choreographed narrative that there is a fight they are fighting up there, either with another person or another tribe. You see, so it becomes a way of whipping the electorates, that these are the these are the individuals who will help our person fight this war and bring us goodies. And you see, silently we still have that narrative of siasa mbaya, maisha mbaya, though the constitution of Kenya has cured most of them with the devolution and I mean with the devolution and the new things that were introduced in the constitution. But still, the members of parliament do not represent us. They represent us de jure. I love how Akili has put it, de jure, but by law. It's in the constitution, but by fact they do not represent us. If they were representing us, then the vetting process would be very rigorous, like what is going to happen today. They would come out and tell us, they will dig deep, but right now it's something that they are stamping and moving on. And that is why sometimes the legislations that they come up with are challenged in court. The judges look at it, they tell you, no, the procedures were never followed. It's not that the procedures were not seen to be followed initially. It was seen not to be followed, but they insisted because they wanted to please a certain political god. So that is what will happen. It will continue to happen so long as we are still ascribing to that narrative of our person.
All right, that is interesting. We take a very short break. Don't go too far. This is People and Politics. Welcome back to Good Morning Kenya. Wakili George Kithi and Wakili Peter Wasaga joining us here on People and Politics. Now we shift gears and talk about the story that is making headline on the Standard newspaper. Resignation fears in Ruto cabinet as President Ruto grapples with escalating dissent within his cabinet. The stepping down of a senior official yesterday and discontent among pointmen point to deeper fractures. Let me start with you, George. What do you make of this? And this, Rupetin, even with the presser that was done on Sunday by the public CS, that is Justin Muturi, is there disquiet or disconnect within the Kenya Kwanza government administration?
Yes. You see, a wound starts with a pimple, then it grows and grows and grows and becomes something that needs to be treated.
Yeah.
That's how those rumors, that's how we saw the fall of the deputy president, Rigathi Gachagua. We had those rumors. In public offices, we jest in rumors. We jest at scars that we know leads to wounds. We see the scars, we don't see it as a wound. But behind the scar, we understand and we know that there's a wound. A person who comes out and discharges a public protest in the odium that we saw of Muturi is wounded, is unhappy, and therefore says that with the confidence that the last resort is to go public. Now, when you're going to castigate government in the manner that he did, you don't just walk there and do it. You plan. In fact, you sleep over it, whether it's the right thing today and tomorrow and a week and probably even months. And by the time you say, now I'm going to do it, because you don't wake up and do it, it means you've planned it, but you have surrounded yourself with certain insulations. Like, for instance, you consult with your party, your family, and political allies in the process, so that as you speak, it's not you speaking. It's a pool of galvanized, agreement among certain people that you go say it, and then the support that you get in case of backlash will come from certain quarters. So therefore, it was choreographed and designed for certain implications, and therefore he hosted that discussion in the manner he did, knowing that if there's backlash, he has a defense to it. Even when we go to court, we plan the points of attack and points of defense. And therefore, that was a point of attack with residual points of defenses that are awaiting the backlash.
Yeah.
So having said that, yes, there's disquiet. Yes, there's a problem. And it is not ordinary. That's why we are discussing it. It is not ordinary because of the principle of collective responsibility, as it were, in government, which is basically a bounden duty to any of those that work with government. The history of Muturi, we know, he narrated it in his speech, how he came to Kenya Kwanza because he was a very close ally of President William Ruto, President Uhuru Kenyatta. How he moved to William Ruto, I think, was probably an understanding that was there in some of the social contracts and political contracts that they entered into at the time. But looks like that, again, is broken or has been probably frustrated, and therefore he comes out fighting. But why is he fighting? He's fighting because his backyard is Mount Kenya, and it's unsettled. It's unsettled because of certain political decisions or political disquiet that has happened in the recent past. So we expect a lot of this to happen first at the base of Mount Kenya in the first instance because of what is happening in Mount Kenya, consolidating into a protest as against the government as it is. In fact, if you look at the president movement in the country, his association with the people and his interaction with the people of Kenya, he avoids certain areas. First area he's avoiding is Mount Kenya because of the disquiet. And obviously, Mount Kenya is unsettled and therefore less receptive to the president as comparing to how he was received initially when he was campaigning and when he came to power. And that continues depending on what happens, because a day in politics in Kenya is far too long. Now, where are we left to in terms of Kenyans for purpose of analyzing the situation? It is also in the house at the Hill. I do think that there is a way Mount Kenya people are treated wherever they are by government officials suspiciously. And therefore, in terms of their interaction and government, they feel the disquiet in the corridors of power. They feel the disquiet where government is and is present. And therefore, assuming you are a county commissioner, in a pool of county commissioners, but you're from Mount Kenya, you will feel the disquiet in that environment on account of the politics prevailing at the time, because you are being watched suspiciously. And that, as that continues, then the boiling points will simmer at a point on account of the fact that resignation will probably be seen more from Mount Kenya than any other place. But of course, fast forward, the intolerance will be speaking to all that. The intolerance to dissenting voices and the Mount Kenya nation. Because you become intolerant to a perceived enemy in person, but also collectively. So the collective psyche of Mount Kenya nation is anti-government and therefore opposition-based as we speak, on account of the culminating, cumulative political issues towards, Rigathi Gachagwa's impeachment and how they are placed in the appointments as we see them and participation in public affairs, and also the interactive environment of the president and government with Mount Kenya. We see it, and it's factual. Suffice to say, therefore, that the disquiet is probably ethnic, partly. The disquiet is probably in the context of the political reorganization, as is happening now, and political based. But the first emotional fissure that we have in government and in our society today, because in any society there'll be fissures of separation. Sometimes it's the clan, sometimes it's religion, sometimes it is ethnicity. What we have taken up by default or otherwise as a Kenyan, as Kenyans, is we divide ourselves robustly and emotionally, ethnically. And therefore, that continues to permeate even in government. The disquiet and the separation in government, therefore, can only be what the society mirrors, and therefore, it must be ethnic-based. So ethnically, therefore, the disquiet shall form itself more robustly as we move, because then we are moving towards, again, what will inform or what is expected to be a campaign period very soon. Maybe not now, but in a few months, it will pick its own life, and you can't stop it, because that's a movement of reorganization towards 2027 elections.
Now, Wakili Wasaga, I want to get your sentiments on this, and also the aspect where this discontent may stem from a point where some of these CSs harbor political ambitions for elective seats. And some of the things that have been cited is also that the working environment is hostile and their roles have been reduced to just formality.
Thank you so much. You see, one thing about politics is that nothing in politics happens as a mere coincidence. Everything is well planned, well choreographed, and are executed to meet a certain political goal or objective. In this case, the objective is very clear. There is the reading of the ground and the hearing of the ground. It's very obvious that as we speak, things are getting out of hand for the Kenya Kwanza regime in Central. The president knows it. He has tried as much as he can to salvage it, but the more he digs, the more it gets deeper. The more he tries, the more he tries to cover it, the more it gets deeper, the more the escarpments develop. And politicians, they see it. What I expected from Muturi was to resign. In that speech, one of the statements I expected from him was to tell us that, given the foregoing, I hereby tender my resignation. But because he knows that he wants to dig some sympathy, of course, whatever he's raising are very cogent. But again, the timing and the manner in which it is executed, it is well planned and well geared towards meeting a political objective. One, there is no non-Mount Kenya kingpin as we speak. As things stand, Rigathi Gachagua may be used to mobilize the electorates, but does not have the legal standing to vie for the presidency, given the impeachment, until the same is overturned. And one of the mistakes the Mount Kenya people did in the previous election was to get into Kenya Kwanza, or was to get into government without a political party. And this has worked to their disadvantage. You see, the former DPS lamented about it. So there is a vacuum, and my analysis is that Muturi has seen it and he wants to feel it. Most probably, when the frustrations come and the push becomes much, he has already hinted that he does not fear the axe. Then he'll be very willing and ready to revive DP, the Democratic Party, that he was the chair, I think so. And when this happens, he shall have gotten the backing of the Mount Kenya people. He shall be the hero. He is one who has spoken about the real matters that are affecting the Kenyans, the abductions. Those are things that are very live. Number two is the Embu gubernatorial seat. You see, after cabinet, and with the suspicion that my seniors rightfully explained, that right now most of the Mount Kenya officials and officials in government, be it cabinet secretary, PSS, they are viewed with lots of suspicion. So they will be there as the symbol, but most of the work are done by other quarters or other people. So that's why sometimes they will just be the cabinet secretaries by name, but by fact they already lost the ground. You could be there, everyone knows you are the cabinet secretary, but there is nothing. So what happens? Cecil Mbarire is the chairman of UDA and the current governor of Embu. It is whispered, not even whispered, it is shouted that Cecil Mbarire orchestrated the removal of the DP. He was one of the people who actually orchestrated the whole process, together with the president, being the chairman of UDA. So the people of Embu are very ready with the axe to send her home. And when they do that, how can Muturi survive? Because Muturi, for a very long time, he has been in appointive positions. I mean, he was a magistrate, then went to, he became a speaker for 2 terms, right? With the 2 terms, then after that, he became the AG After the AG, he is now the cabinet secretary. What happens if he falls short of glory, which I know he has already fallen short of glory with the House of at the Hill? What happens next? He has to fight for a political survival. And one of the ways is to come out very courageously, very boldly, to castigate the government. And he's castigating the government with facts which are live and which are making sense to everyone across board. Number two, is coming out as a victim whose son had been abducted. And what is he telling us? He's trying to tell us that, you see, in this government, it doesn't matter whether you are in government or not. The level of impunity is something that is beyond everyone. It is only known to a few sects within the government and the security apparatus. Because he had the option of just blaming the security apparatus, but he blamed the Kenya Kwanza government. What is he trying to tell us? He is taking the blame squarely to the president. Then he went ahead and said that, you see, when I joined this government, I was warned. Meaning that he's trying also to tell the president and the people of Mount Kenya that it was a sacrifice we did, and our sacrifice has not been appreciated, despite being warned by our close acquaintances, by our close friends. We decided to support. You remember the same narrative regarding Gachagua also raised, that I was warned by my family members against supporting the Kenya Kwanza government, but I supported it. So what is it? The card is very simple. He wants to be frustrated. He wants to be pushed out with an orchestration that is well planned. Then, of course, he will win the sympathy. And before you know it, he'll be one of the greatest contestants in Central, either as a governor against Mbarire or as a possible kingpin to run for the presidency. Remember, it was whispered even last time when they were struggling between choosing Ruto and President Ruto and Raila Odinga in the previous election. There was whispers that Muturi would be fronted by Uhuru Kenyatta to vie as to vie for the presidency. So meaning that he has built that portfolio. He has the capacity. He has the experience, he has held very serious leadership positions, and it will be very easy to sell him. If he was very genuine, because he's raising very serious points, what was very difficult in him just resigning. And the level of, let me now comment on the level of impunity in this government, which actually, if not checked by the members of parliament, by the electorates, then we stand to go back to a banana republic. Because a member of parliament who is very close to the president comes out in broad daylight and tells the country that even if he does not math, we shall math it. We shall add 1 + 1, and we shall have the president announced. So you are telling us that there is no point of going to vote. We already have our president, and we are even contemplating of extending the term. Then you see another close ally of the president, in the president's presence, abuses Kenyans with very uncouth and backward pronunciation. You remember what Farah Malim said? In public, in the presence of the president, and nothing, there's no comment about it. And it shows the level of impunity. It shows the level of carelessness in government and the level of braggadocio in government, that they know that mutadu, we shall still sail through. So any person can easily win an election going against the Kenya Kwanza government, especially on Mount Kenya, in Mount Kenya, where the disquiet is very loud, and already it is seen that they already walked out of the government. So any person who supports this Kenya Kwanza regime is likely to face the axe. And that is not a secret. It is something that is very obvious. So Muturi knows, and most of the Mount Kenya leaders will also follow the suit. Remember Mbaye, the other day, when he resigned, you see the response that he is resigning, and he already lost the job long time ago by the disbandment of the. So meaning that he has been taking the salary, yet the government knows that he already lost the job long time ago, so that his resignation is nothing. It's just being watered down. And so it's something that we see going on, and it will go on, and not now, not only now, but by 2027, the allies, the allies of the president, the Kenya Kwanza government in Mount Kenya, shall have all shifted allegiance. But one last thing that I want to say, that in politics, politics is dynamic, and one slight move can tilt everything. It's very early to predict who will win the elections in 2027, because one move by the president can just bring all the Kenyans on board, and they may just vote for him. And one move by any politician may also tilt the scale. So in politics, there are no permanent friends, there are no permanent enemies. What is permanent is interest and also betrayal.
Interesting. And also you've talked about reckless utterances, which is of course captured on the front page of the Daily Nation. Drums of war. President William Ruto's close allies have in recent days made strongly worded statements vowing to secure him a second term in office in 2027 by whatever means possible, echoing past reckless declarations sorry about that, by politicians that have plunged the country into post-election turmoil. That story is told on page 4 and 5. And here they have put photos of leaders who have used unpalatable words, and also others who have vowed to secure the president a second term in office. I don't know, Wakili George Kithi, what do you think of this? Of these utterances by, especially these ones who have vowed to secure a second term for the president by whatever means possible?
How I know government works is that it tries to organize itself into certain patterns. Patterns that are official and patterns that are unofficial. So when, for instance, the president is going for a rally in Bamachoge or Meru or whatever it is, the leaders that go there are invited. And therefore the seat arrangements will be made even beforehand. That is one. Then the leadership, those that would be sitting at the high table, usually meet and predetermine the outcome of that rally. Whether they're going to support so-and-so, whether they're going to pronounce a certain government policy, whether they're going to talk about affordable housing, whatever they're going to say. And the speakers are tasked with pronouncements, so that when the president eventually speaks, and ordinarily and by protocol speaks last, it's a build-up to what has been spoken before he speaks. So nobody speaks vitriol which has not been choreographed. Nobody speaks without permission. If you understand that, then when you're at a rally, you must observe the first speakers to understand what the president will eventually speak to. He may choose to be silent, and even that silence in itself is an endorsement of that which has already been spoken. And therefore, nobody speaks by default. Everybody speaks matched with the intent of the outcome of that meeting. And we do it. When you go for a rally, assuming you are campaigning, you have people who speak before you. There is the MCA candidate, there is the MP candidate, there will be the senator candidate, senatorial, women rep, the governor, and then the president. That's how it's arranged in a campaign. The MCA will be told to talk about the water problem. The member of parliament will be given another task. Women rep will talk about the NGAF and stuff like that, and how it has probably been misused or used properly, assuming it's an opposition or a government, whatever it is. So even these rallies, I'll call them rallies, but the meetings, meet the people, tours that the president does are planned in the same manner. In fact, even transport is planned. There are some who probably will go earlier. There are some who will go by aeroplane, others will go by road, depending on your importance and where you are placed. And others will in fact fly with the president himself in the same plane. So by the time a person speaks in the manner that he has spoken, it has been endorsed. And if the president is quiet, then it also speaks to the endorsement of that statement. So those people are speaking towards a certain result. The result is either to threaten, to cajole, or a certain piece that is coming up, a government policy that needs the robustness of government.
What about testing the waters?
Yes, which includes the budgeting process. We are going to be hard on you now so that then you can't even protest. We're going to abduct you now because we're going to budget and we need money and we don't want you to oppose the budget. We abduct you now to instill fear in your hearts so that when we are budgeting, you don't protest again. So even the abductions we have now are speaking to something. They're not default. They're not law enforcement. See, arrest and abduction are two different things. An arrest is a process of subduing a person towards presentation in a court of law and a court process. Abduction has no intention whatsoever of subjecting the person into a court process, but to subdue something, including the voice of the person or the right to associate and assembly and so on and so forth. So abduction is not the same as arrest, yet arrest and abduction are all official, being done by people, by officials of the government. And that also then gives alarm towards something. And I think consolidating all what is happening and the pronouncements and what is going on, the government had worst experience in the last budgeting cycle because of the protest. Never again would any leader want to go through that process. And therefore what you do is you start early planning. And those that are planning, including security, are why don't we subdue them now so that when the time comes, they're all subdued. Break them now so that when the time comes, they're not strong. And that's what you need to do to your enemy. You need to pump fear into the heart of your enemy continuously, persistently, insistently, until such a time that the person cannot rise again. So the people, therefore, because of the protest of last year, and we are entering the budget cycle, they must be fearful enough of the regime in the context of which they cannot then, because there's talk of abusing the internet and continuously that is, and we see it in action, and we see it in fact because their abduction and their arrests and so on and so forth. That is a process to subdue and prepare for the next budget cycle. They must increase taxes because we can't survive without taxes. And I think things are not very good because we see how the economy is performing. And to do that, you are preparing for another friction with the public. But to subdue the public, you must subdue it now, not then. So prepare through actions such as the spoken words and acts that instill fear.
All right. Let's take a short break and we'll be back and I will be getting sentiments from our Peter Wasaga. Don't go too far. This is People and Politics on Good Morning Kenya. You're watching Good Morning Kenya. This is People and Politics. And now we want to wind up this segment and I will give my guest a chance to give their final submission. Let me start with you, Wasaga.
Thank you so much. It's very clear that nothing in politics is an accident. No speech in politics is an accident. No action by a politician is an accident. Everything is well planned, either to instill fear, to exude confidence, or to meet a certain political objective. We are living at a very interesting times as Kenyans. Kenya, Kenya that has always been viewed as a peace haven for the East African community, has become a hotspot for abduction, both for citizens and non-citizens. It is high time that the government takes responsibility and ensures that the public is well secured as enshrined in the Constitution.
All right.
The only time the public has a romantic relationship with those that will be in power is during campaigns. After that, there's an ordinarily friction between those that are in power and those that are being ruled, the ruler and the ruled. So this is normal. It depends to the extensity to which this applies and the friction relational there too. So what I think is Kenyans must look at this as a normal cyclic thing that's going to be there, not just now, over and over. So the insertion of Article 1 gives them more power to be able to speak more and more on what they want their government to do, not just this one, and maybe even eventual governments. So it's normal. I look at it as normal. The excesses such as abduction and all that, I think those shouldn't be there. I think it's cheap to do that. Repression is bad and it's cheap. But the government should look at it as very normal, and the public should look at it as very normal. And we exist in that environment. Unfortunately, we elected democracy. And it's not going to be easy for anyone getting into power. You must get power to know that you're going to be regulated by certain institutions, including the power of the people. And the power of the people must continue to be present and sacrosanct.
All right. Wakili George Kithi and Wakili Peter Wasaga joining us here on Good Morning Kenya to talk about politics, people, and politics. My name is Mike Migwe. This is where we end this segment. Good Morning Kenya continues shortly on both radio and TV. Don't go too far.